You have the right to remain silent. That was the line delivered by a man wearing cargo, shorts and a navy polo with HOA security stitched in crooked white thread. He clicked a pair of off-brand handcuffs like he'd been rehearsing for community theater. Not an arrest. The neighbors froze on their lawns, slack-jawed as red and blue strobe lights spun across the cul-de-sac. The lights weren't even from a police cruiser. They were cheap magnetic flashers slapped onto the roof of a dusty Toyota Corolla. Still, the scene was dramatic enough to wake up the whole street. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, letting the absurdity settle in. Patricia, the HOA president, stood across the curb with her clipboard hugged to her chest, chin lifted like a Roman general surveying her conquest. Behind her, Mrs. Delaney clutched her lapdog like we were in the middle of a drug bust. Someone whispered, "Are they actually arresting him?" And another neighbor shushed them, eyes wide. Here's the thing about HOAs. They thrive on appearances. They love the illusion of authority. That's why you get 3-page letters about lawn height or the wrong shade of mailbox paint. But tonight, Patricia had outdone herself. Forget letters. Forget fines. She'd escalated straight to theatrics, complete with volunteer officers playing dress-up in embroidered polos. And she wanted everyone to see it. One of the men stepped forward, puffing his chest. "Sir, you're in violation of Community Code Section 8. Unauthorized vehicle storage." He pointed to my truck like it was Exhibit A. "We're taking you into custody until this can be resolved with the board." I almost laughed. Custody? In what? The Corolla with the flashing party lights? But I bit my tongue, letting the silence stretch. The man rattled his handcuffs again, clearly expecting compliance. Patricia nodded approvingly, her lips twitching at the corners like she'd already written the victory speech in her head. Let me back up. This all started with letters, 4 of them in 2 weeks. The first accused me of illegal parking because my truck's rear bumper extended 2 inches over the driveway apron. The second claimed my porch flag was improperly displayed. The third, unbelievably, warned me about intimidating body language after I waved too enthusiastically at a board member during my morning jog. By the 4th letter, Patricia wasn't even pretending anymore. It flat out said, "Consider this your final warning before formal action is taken." Well, I guess this was formal action. "Sir," the taller faux officer barked, "turn around and place your hands behind your back." I tilted my head, playing dumb. "And if I don't?" He hesitated, glancing at Patricia. She gave him a curt nod, clipboard pressed tighter to her chest. "Then we'll be forced to escalate." The words hung in the humid night air, almost comical against the background noise of crickets and the faint smell of someone's overcooked barbecue. Escalate. Like what? Call in the leaf blower brigade? I pushed off my truck slowly, meeting his eyes. "Let me get this straight. You're arresting me for parking in my own driveway, under the authority of HOA security," he said firmly. "And who deputized you?" Patricia stepped forward at that, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "The board voted unanimously to create a security task force. These men are empowered to enforce community rules." I couldn't help myself. I chuckled. "Empowered? Patricia, this isn't Gotham. You don't get to invent your own police force." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone stifled a laugh. Patricia's face flushed crimson. "This is not a joke," she snapped. "You've repeatedly ignored warnings, and this community demands compliance." Her words were crisp, rehearsed, dripping with the authority she desperately wanted everyone to believe she had. But the cracks were already showing. Neighbors shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. The taller officer fidgeted, his confidence waning. I leaned closer, lowering my voice just enough that Patricia could hear. "Patricia, are you sure you want to keep pushing this?" Her nostrils flared. "Absolutely. Actions have consequences." Oh, she was right about that. Just not in the way she thought. I stepped back, raising my hand slightly in mock surrender. "All right then," I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. "If this is official HOA business, I'm happy to cooperate. But before you cuff me, you might want to make sure your little task force is operating legally." The neighbors perked up, sensing a shift. Patricia blinked, caught off guard. "We are acting within our rights." I smiled, slow and deliberate. Funny, because I seem to recall impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony. The words dropped like a stone into still water, sending ripples through the cul-de-sac. The fake officer's hand froze mid-reach. The other one shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the flashing lights on the Corolla. Patricia's expression flickered, just for a second, but long enough for me to see the panic behind her eyes. The crowd erupted into whispers. Phones tilted higher, cameras zooming in. This wasn't just an HOA scuffle anymore. This was a public unraveling. And me? I stayed calm, leaning back against my truck again, letting Patricia stew in the mess she'd created. Because here's the thing. She still thought this was about parking, about power, about a dock or a truck or a flag. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. "Mr. Thompson, we find you guilty on all counts." That was Patricia's opening line, spoken with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for a courtroom, not a carpeted HOA clubhouse that smelled faintly of disinfectant and powdered creamer. She said it before the meeting even started, before the first chair stopped squeaking under a shifting neighbor. The words hung in the stale air like a sentence already passed. And the way she tapped her clipboard on the table, it might as well have been a judge's gavel. I sat 2 rows back, letting the drama wash over me. If you've never seen an HOA meeting spiral into theater, imagine a middle school mock trial, except the actors are retirees with vendettas and the stakes are aesthetic harmony. Patricia was in her element, perched at the head of a long folding table, silk scarf draped over her shoulders, folders stacked like legal briefs. She even had 2 plastic water bottles lined up as if this were going to be a marathon cross-examination. Her board members, 4 nodding heads in pastel sweaters, flanked her like a jury prepped to agree with everything she said. The neighbors filled the rows of folding chairs, shifting awkwardly, some curious, some annoyed, most here because they wanted to see whether Patricia's HOA police debacle was going to get a sequel. Patricia cleared her throat and began reading. The charges are as follows. Number 1. Repeated illegal parking violations, including obstructing sightlines and endangering community safety. A neighbor coughed to cover a laugh. My truck hadn't moved in days. Number 2. Intimidation of HOA members, including hostile body language and verbal aggression. I raised an eyebrow. Hostile body language? Was waving now considered assault? Number 3, Patricia pressed on, failure to comply with HOA security directives, including resisting lawful detainment. That one nearly broke me. I had to cover my mouth with my hand to stop from laughing outright. Lawful detainment. From 2 guys with eBay badges and cargo shorts. The neighbors weren't buying it either. A ripple of murmurs filled the room, some stifling chuckles, others shaking their heads. Still, Patricia pressed on, her voice steady, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notes. Every nod from the board, every scribbled line on her pad, fed her confidence. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, playing the part of the accused. Not defensive, not angry, just patient. Because this was what I'd been waiting for. Let Patricia build her stage. Let her pile the drama higher. The taller the tower, the harder the fall. She pointed her pen at me like it was a weapon. "Mr. Thompson, do you deny these charges?" I met her eyes. "Deny? No. I'm not denying anything. I'm questioning whether any of this is remotely within your authority." Gasps fluttered through the rows. Patricia's smile tightened. "The HOA board has full authority over this community." "Over lawn care, yes," I said, keeping my tone calm, measured. "Over mailbox paint, sure. But since when does the HOA have the power to detain residents?" or issue criminal charges. A man in the back snorted and quickly pretended to cough. Patricia snapped her gaze toward him, then back to me. "You are undermining the authority of this board." "I think you're doing a fine job of that yourself," I replied, voice steady. Her scarf twitched against her collarbone as she bristled. "We are here to vote on your penalties. Continued resistance will only make matters worse." That was her tell. Her overconfidence. She thought she had the room locked down, that her loyal board members and their ready-made charges were enough to put me in check. She didn't realize she was walking straight into her own trap. The meeting dragged on like a trial scene, Patricia reading witness statements that sounded suspiciously like her own writing. A resident reported feeling unsafe when Mr. Thompson stood in his driveway with his arms crossed. Another said I had spoken in a tone that could be interpreted as threatening. It was laughable. Still, she read each one with the gravity of sworn testimony, her voice echoing in the cramped room. I let her finish, let her stack the deck, let her savor every second of her manufactured power. And then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, lowering my voice so the room had to lean in to hear. "Patricia, I've been patient. I've sat through your letters, your theatrics, and now this circus. But if you're going to accuse me of crimes, then you're playing in the wrong arena. Because this isn't just about HOA rules anymore. This is about the law." The murmurs rose again, louder this time. Someone whispered, "What's he talking about?" Patricia's pen froze mid-note. I pulled a slim folder from my bag, setting it on my lap. "And if you really want to go down this road," I continued, "then maybe it's time I introduce myself properly, not just as your neighbor, but as someone whose job it is to investigate things like impersonating law enforcement." A hush fell over the room. Patricia's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. For the first time all night, she didn't look smug. She looked unsure. I didn't open it yet. Not here, not now. Timing is everything. Instead, I slid the folder back into the bag, stood slowly, and adjusted my jacket. "But we can save that for the next meeting," I said evenly. The room erupted into whispers. Patricia banged her pen against the clipboard, desperate to regain control, but her voice cracked as she declared, "This meeting is adjourned." I walked out without another word, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air thick with tension. Behind me, the neighbors swarmed, phones buzzing, voices rising, all of them replaying the moment in their heads. Patricia had wanted a trial. She got one. She just didn't realize she'd put herself on the stand. And the real evidence? That was still in my pocket. "My name is Special Agent Thompson, and you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." That was the line that silenced the clubhouse. Not the shuffle of papers, not the clink of Patricia's pen against her clipboard. My words. And then, without fanfare, I slid the leather case across the oak table. The gold FBI seal caught the light from the flickering fluorescent above us, and for the first time since I'd moved into Sycamore Lane, Patricia looked like she'd swallowed her own rulebook whole. You could have heard a pin drop, or maybe just the faint hum of the old soda machine in the corner, the carbonation fizzing like a fuse burning low. The neighbors leaned forward in their folding chairs, eyes darting between my badge and Patricia's suddenly pale face. Even the two self-proclaimed HOA security officers stiffened, their hands retreating from their belts where they'd holstered those ridiculous plastic cuffs. Let me back up. Because this moment? It wasn't spontaneous. It was weeks in the making. Patricia had been ramping up her power play since the day I parked my truck in the driveway. It started with letters, typed, double-spaced, complete with highlighted bylaw citations. Section 4.2a. All vehicles must be parked head-in to maintain visual conformity. Then came the threats of fines. Then the so-called detainment, which was less law enforcement and more community theater. I played along, silent, patient, waiting for her to dig the hole deep enough that when I dropped the truth, there'd be no climbing out. And now, here we were. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. This is highly irregular. We are a private board. You can't just— Patricia, I cut her off gently, almost kindly. You impersonated law enforcement. You directed 2 men to attempt a false arrest. You've compiled fabricated reports accusing me of criminal conduct. Do you have any idea how serious that is? The board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their hands fascinating. One of them, Marlene, always quick to agree with Patricia, muttered, "Maybe we should consult counsel." Patricia snapped her head toward her, but Marlene avoided eye contact. I leaned back, keeping my tone even. Let's put it simply. HOA bylaws. You can enforce those. Trash bins, lawns, fences. That's your playground. But criminal law, arrests, detainment, that's not just outside your jurisdiction. It's a felony. The words landed heavy. You could see it in Patricia's clenched jaw, the twitch of her scarf as she adjusted it like armor. She wanted to argue. She wanted to claw her way back to control. But the badge on the table stole her breath every time she looked at it. One of the officers, the taller one with the mustache, finally spoke. We were just following instructions. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Exactly, I said, turning my gaze on him. And that's why I'm not focusing on you. Not yet, because the person who gave the orders, she's the one responsible. The neighbors whispered louder now, a low tide of voices swelling around the room. Someone actually pulled out their phone and started recording. Patricia noticed and hissed, "Turn that off." But it was too late. The narrative had slipped from her hands. I tapped the badge with my index finger, letting the metallic emblem catch the light again. I should be filing a report tonight. Impersonating federal officers. Attempted unlawful detention. Abuse of authority in a private organization. Do you know how that looks on paper? Her silence was answer enough. And then came the mini-climax, the crack in her composure. Patricia's voice wavered, thin and brittle. We were only trying to maintain order in the community, protect property values, keep everyone safe. I met her gaze, steady. Order isn't built on fear. And you don't get to play police just because someone parks a truck you don't like. The words hit like a hammer. You could see it ripple through the room, neighbors nodding, some outright smirking. The empire Patricia had built on intimidation was crumbling right there, in a clubhouse that smelled faintly of stale donuts and coffee creamer. I stood, sliding the badge back into my jacket. The air in the room shifted, heavy with realization. Patricia's pen, her gavel substitute, lay abandoned on the table. Her hands trembled just enough for the board to notice. "Here's how this works," I said quietly, so they had to lean in to hear. "I could pursue this officially. I still might. But I'll give you one chance to reconsider how this HOA operates. Because if you ever, and I mean ever, try something like that again." I let the silence finish the sentence for me. The room was frozen, every eye on Patricia. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her empire wasn't just shaken, it was in ruins. I walked toward the door, the echo of my footsteps louder than any gavel strike. Behind me, the whispers grew frantic, a storm of speculation and relief. I pushed the door open, the night air rushing in, cool and sharp against the heat of the clubhouse. And just as I stepped out into the parking lot, I caught Patricia's voice, barely audible, trembling. We'll see about this." The door swung shut behind me, her words clinging to the air like smoke. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.